Welcome to the Baptist Reformation Podcast, where we discuss confessional theology in the context of a non-confessional age. Well, welcome to take number 3 of the Baptist Reformation Podcast, chapter 5 of the 1689, paragraph 2. Yes, this is indeed take number 3. So let's hope all goes well here. But without any further ado, I am on a press schedule, especially since I've tried to record this thing 3 times now. So we are going to have to get right to it. Paragraph 2. What does it say? Well, it says this. It says, although in relation to foreknowledge, to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause, all things come to pass immutably and infallibly, so that there is not anything befalls any by chance or without his providence, yet by the same providence he ordereth them to fall out or come about, according to the nature of second causes, either necessarily, freely, or contingently. Proverbs 16:33 says this. It says, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. And the idea is that the lot's result looks random because it's just casting lots, right? And wherever they land it determines the choice of the parties who cast the lots. Much like flipping a coin determines the decisions of two parties insofar as, who gets to kick the ball first or whatever. And so the idea is that even though this appears random, even though this is a free, we freely threw this up in the air and determined to watch where it landed, it's still predestined by God, and it's still within the scope of God's divine providence, and is in fact guided and governed by God's providence, God being the first cause of all things. And so that's the idea of Proverbs 16:33. We see this elsewhere, in the spontaneity of Jehu in killing Ahab, and all of the events that had to be positioned prior to the birth of Christ, which fulfilled many nuances in Old Testament prophecy. And so we see those things come to pass, even by means of creatures doing things according to their own choices. They're freely acting as responsible agents. Yet God is using those choices to bring about his decreed will. And so it's important to make that distinction. The confession itself makes that distinction. First, I want to start off by mentioning a difference in the 1689 between the Westminster. In the 1689, they add the line, so that there is not anything befalls any by chance or without his providence. Again, it's not a change in doctrine. It's not an added doctrine. It's not doctrine taken away. It is simply a clarification of the data that exists in paragraph 2 of the Westminster already. So all the 1689 is doing is adding clarifying words. People are going to start asking questions like, well, you say that all this is grounded in the first cause, which is God, but then you say, some of these things come about freely and contingently. So how does that work? And what the confession is saying is that either way, any way we determine to construe this doctrine of providence, any way we think of talking about it, we have to understand that nothing befalls by chance or without or outside of God's providence. So any way we want to talk about it, those two things are certain. Nothing happens by chance, and nothing happens outside of God's providence. And so that's what the confession just wants to qualify there. Turretin, we can gain some help from Francis Turretin in the Atlantic Institutes, and he says this. He says, this liberty of the divine will about created things must be understood absolutely and a priori, and with respect to the things considered in themselves. For in this sense, God wills created things necessarily from hypothesis, because he can no more will them on account of the immutability of his will. But speaking absolutely, he wills them freely, because he is influenced to will them at first by no necessity, but by mere liberty, and could abstain from their production. Let me turn that And then Article 7 says, "But this indifference of the divine will, so far from lowering the majesty of God, is the greatest proof of his perfection, who, as an independent being, needs nothing out of himself or outside of himself, which is the greatest testimony to the imperfection of creatures." And what he's saying here is that God depends on nothing outside of himself to do what he does. He is absolutely free. But there is a distinction to be made between there's different kinds of necessity that Francis distinguishes between. He distinguishes between absolute necessity on the one hand and hypothetical necessity on the other. Hypothetical necessity is like if God decrees that what's an example? I think he even gives an example. If I wanted to look here carefully. God decrees that. Let me get his example because it's better than mine. No, I can't find it. I'll just give an example based on scripture. Jehu, for example, killing Ahab. If God wills that Ahab should die, if God has decreed that Ahab should die, that is necessarily going to happen. But it's necessarily going to happen not because God has to make it happen, but because it's grounded in God's decree. So since God decreed it, it will necessarily come to pass. Okay, that's because it's based on the hypothesis, Turton calls it, of the decree, of God's decree. So it will necessarily come to pass in that fashion, in the sense of hypothetical necessity, not absolute necessity. God could have done otherwise. He could have determined not to kill Ahab, for example. It wasn't absolutely necessary that God had Ahab taken out by Jehu. So that helps us kind of talk about the confessional language, necessarily, freely, contingently. God wills things necessarily in that they will come to pass no matter what, because he has directly decreed them to come to pass. Then he has willed things freely. That is, they will still come to pass. It doesn't take away the fact that they will indeed come to pass. But he wills them he wills them freely, and by that I mean he wills that second causes, by the choices of second causes, the free choices of second causes, his will come to pass. The example being Jehu drawing his bow back and killing Ahab. That was Jehu's decision, but God used Jehu's decision to bring about the destruction of Ahab and his house. And then contingently, these are things that are obviously, these are everything that is that rests on God's will to be, that such that God could have done otherwise, or such that a creature could have done otherwise, are contingent effects. So, in other words, and we're speaking relatively here. But a contingent effect would be like me picking up the confession. I didn't have to do that, and I could have willed to do otherwise. And God did not have to decree that I should do that. So it's a fact that I just picked up the confession, but it's a fact that's dependent on something for it to be a fact. So I'll take that out of the way. The confession in paragraph 2, it makes a distinction. It says, although in relation. Well, although what? Although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, yet by the same providence he ordereth them to occur according to the nature of second causes. And what the confession is doing here is it's making a distinction between the first cause, and it's a careful distinction, between the first cause, without which, nothing will come to pass, and the second cause, by which the first cause has determined to bring about his effects. Okay? So God, being the first cause, has determined that at least some of his effects will be brought about by second causes, that is, free agents or creatures that are acting within his creation. And they are included in God's decree to serve as a means to bring about God's will. Okay, so they are created causes, are second causes, and God, being the only necessary cause, is the first cause. Okay, and I think that's important to understand. So, although in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, it is in relation to those things. In fact, it's grounded in those things. God has still determined to bring about his will according to means. He has determined to use means to cause his will to come to pass, and we can refer to those means as second causes. And I think that is a helpful way of talking about this. So, a little bit of a shorter podcast, and I apologize for that because I flubbed up. This is a third take. Part of it's my fault. I did not check my audio on the first take, and on the second take, I did not check my audio either. And while it was impeccable on the second take, I decided to stop, check the audio, and then begin a third take. So here we are, third take. We're at 11 minutes, 25 seconds. Sorry, it's a little bit shorter. Hopefully, you still gleaned much from it. Please, if you have found these episodes beneficial, I encourage you to share them. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Ask us questions in the comments section, either YouTube or Facebook. Please share the link on Facebook on your personal page. That would help out immensely in getting this theology out to more people who may not be familiar with it at this time. So please act as a means in disseminating historical particular Baptist theology according to the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. So God bless you guys. Have a good day.